Welcome back to the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast. I'm Tim Kotzman here with Joe Bryan. Joe, thanks for joining us. Thanks for the time. And how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Tim, and thank you for the kind invite to be on the show.
Absolutely. I think I first came across you in relation to your video, What's the Problem? And it can be found on Sats vs Fiat, so Sats versus Fiat.com. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your background, but maybe start with what was the impetus for that video that Michael Saylor has retweeted and has kind of gone viral, and I think a lot of people are discovering you and your work through that.
Well, it's more of an accidental success than anything, Tim. I only made the video because I'd made a presentation for some friends and it had gone down very well, and they said, you should show this to more people. And so invested some time in producing a video, which I was not going to be embarrassed about. Because
Sure.
you're used to being in front of the camera. I'm absolutely not, as most of the audience here would be similarly, I suspect. And I just wanted to put something out that I'd be happy with living on the internet forever. And so probably made it of higher quality than I would have done otherwise. But the idea was really, uh, I was forced to produce 30 minutes of content for a group of people I didn't know. And I was given any topic to talk about, but I only want to talk about Bitcoin. But within 30 minutes, I needed to address these people who I knew nothing about. And so instead of trying to explain what Bitcoin is, I thought, well, it's just, if I change the target just to be at the end of the 30 minutes, they'll want to learn about Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Then that's a much more manageable target. And it means I can start at zero and assume nothing about anybody. And so what I've then produced is something which is accessible for all, whether you're a child or a pensioner or anybody in between, whether you know about Bitcoin or crypto or you don't. But by the end of it, you understand what Bitcoin is for, and you have a mental framework for which then to overlay the things you go on and hopefully then learn about Bitcoin, or at least be able to convey to others why Bitcoin is so critical for humanity. And yeah, I've just been blown away by how popular it's become. I just wanted a few people to watch it, so I wasn't embarrassed by the viewer numbers when I put it on YouTube. So thank you to everyone who has watched it, and if you haven't, please do go and check it out. But really, it's a whistle stop tour. There's nothing in there just to manage expectations. There's nothing in there that you don't already know, right? As a seasoned Bitcoiner, but it's delivered in a way, in a structure which is a story, a very accessible story, and takes you on a tour through a free market, perfect money versus imperfect money, and the government on one side of an island having a big red button that they can press and change any aspect of this money, whereas on the other side you've got Satoshi with perfect money, and how the poor side of the island, or the corruptible side of the island, sort of tailspins and ends up looking like today, like the world we see around us today. And it helps anybody that watches it tie back all of the issues that we see in our lives today as being a direct result of the Big Red Button. And so it's very clear come the end of it that we need the separation of money and state, and within 30 minutes. And so I would encourage people to go and watch it, and I'm very grateful for you for getting in touch and inviting me on the show to talk about that, and then talk about other things as well, hopefully.
Absolutely. Could you share, I don't know, it may be other places as well, but share a little bit about your background, your background of physics at Oxford University, then you had a decade in investment banking, and then a decade as an entrepreneur. And as we're walking through that, maybe highlighting that moment when you were first introduced to Bitcoin, because that's always a
too late.
specific story to the
Well,
individual.
it's always too late, isn't it? I had touch points earlier, but it took, you know, three three interactions really for me to take it seriously. But that was in 2020. But yeah, I studied physics, then went to Goldman, 10 years as an equity derivatives trader, mainly at Goldman, also Morgan Stanley, UBS. Then started modeling football, soccer from a mathematical perspective. Um, Initially, it was a bit of fun to try and see if I could calculate the probabilities of certain outcomes, um, using similar techniques that are used in derivatives. Realized I could do that, better than the bookmakers in some areas at the time, and so left the city to move into sports, and subsequently built a quant engineering business with a partner where we would do mathematical modeling, write algorithms that would then be bolted onto sort of real-time engineering, and we'd build automated trading systems and then turn them inside out and start supplying the bookmakers with better prices, better models, new and innovative consumer products that those models and engineering unlocked. And yeah, we were acquired within a couple of years, and then spent the last 5 years up until the middle of last year, growing the acquiring business from a national champion to a global player today. And over that period of time, I sort of went full circle with the finance. I ended up running M&A and corporate development. So yeah, playing a big role in the financings that we had as that business scaled, doing sizable international M&A, and also running the venture capital fund that we started on balance sheet for the last couple of years as we began to invest again in small companies, given the success that we'd had previously. But given I found Bitcoin in 2020, going on that full cycle of, startup to acquisition to scale up to effective, pseudo exit, has allowed me to step out and focus on the one thing that matters now, which is Bitcoin. And so all my energy is now outside of family is directed towards Bitcoin and thinking about how we move the world to a Bitcoin standard as quickly as possible.
And for the audience, was all of that happening in or around London? Were you based there the entire time?
All in the UK.
Got it.
All in the UK. Yeah, my family's from here. We have children, so yeah. It's only holidays abroad. I would love the opportunity maybe at some point in the future to come and live a bit closer to where you are over there, Tim, but it'll be a few years, yeah.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by OnRamp. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi-sig vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. To learn more, schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team. Go to www.onrampbitcoin.com. In your view, why should corporations consider holding Bitcoin in their treasuries? Are there like benefits and risks compared to traditional assets like cash and bond and gold? And not to be too obvious, right, as far as inflation and some of these other things that maybe people have covered, but in your view, do you have a specific thought process through that?
Yeah, I mean it's gonna come as no surprise, but if you don't have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, then you're going backwards. You have a slow death coming to you, and we are such an early stage still that this is considered a radical position to take, especially in the UK. probably increasingly less so in the US, given what's happening with Microstrategy putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet and a more conducive political and economic climate for entrepreneurs and Bitcoin specifically compared to the UK, but still starting from a very, very small place. And you only have to watch these videos by Michael Saylor and the to see why that there's a very concrete rationale here for any business owner to be considering Bitcoin as part of their mix of assets. Now, I think it depends. So the short answer is every business needs this.
Mm-hmm.
The longer answer is only a small number of businesses do this. And part of the reason is you need somebody strong who is the decision maker in that business to action these things at this point in time. And so, Michael Saylor is a great example. It's very hard to replicate that from a public company perspective, given the governance structures in place. Because you need a quorum of Bitcoiners around the table who are all aligned and see that the cash in their businesses are melting ice cube, which is a rare occurrence.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a founder, majority shareholder, then you have a lot more leeway when it comes to actioning some of these things. And so it probably explains until Bitcoin becomes, until Bitcoin has a greater level of transmission through the general thinking of the public, including board members and things. It's going to be very hard to really move the needle from a public company perspective outside of founder owners. But as you go down the size of companies, the percentage of companies that are ultimately held by an individual or a small number of individuals who have a unilateral decision-making capability, but also long-term in alignment to the health of the business. It means that your opportunity to then put Bitcoin on the balance sheet becomes meaningfully improved. Because when you look at the people involved with public companies, often they're on the board for short periods of time, stock options vesting in 3 or 4 years. They're not thinking about wanting to make sure the company is there in 20 years' time or 50 years' time. Whereas as you go down that hierarchy of company sizes, people have inherited the business from their family, or they've built it and they want to hand it on to their children, or ensure it's there for their staff because they know everybody. And Bitcoin is the perfect vehicle for this. If you don't have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, the company is going to die. Bitcoin gives you everlasting life effectively as a company over a long enough time period. Now, and this is very much approaching it from a Bitcoin maximalist perspective, that Bitcoin is going to consume the world. But it's entirely logical. And, Bitcoin as a treasury asset should be on every balance sheet of every company in the world, and ultimately will be. But the ones that adopt it first, even from a very small degree, will see outsized benefits relative to everybody else. But those outsized benefits are not just financial in terms of asset appreciation. It's all the other things that come along with putting Bitcoin on your balance sheet. Because for you to have put Bitcoin on your balance sheet, it means that you're thinking about Bitcoin. It means that you're thinking about the things that are the reasons why you're thinking about Bitcoin. And so you're then in starting to improve the quality of your decision making, your long-term planning. It also means that you are much closer to the mindset of an underserved audience, an ever-growing, ever wealthier, incredibly motivated customer segment that is overlooked by almost everybody. And so Bitcoin gives you competitive advantage across the spectrum. financial security, revenue generation, longevity, improved decision making, improved levels of ownership. It is a panacea for the fiat poison that we have running through the system today.
Do you want to touch on, we were discussing a little bit earlier, Bitcoin balance sheets for SMEs. Could you explain for the audience what an SME is and what you're seeing in
Sure.
that space?
Sure. So in the UK, we would typically term SMEs as small to medium size enterprises. So privately held companies that are family owned or slightly larger, but not probably moving towards the area, the size of which it would become interesting from a private equity perspective, or considering moving towards an IPO or some sort of major M&A transactions. Now, those are the types of businesses that are held or controlled by founders or families or small numbers of decision makers, and so can move quickly given the right education, the right support, and the right long-term outlook. And I would caveat that with it becomes a lot easier in some countries than others, because if you have a regulatory environment which is hostile to Bitcoin, it becomes more challenging, to help people with that level of education and feel like it's the right thing to do. But also there becomes challenges around, accounting and, banking access and all of these things as well. So the UK is definitely behind where the US is. However, we are increasingly seeing increased numbers of small businesses beginning to add Bitcoin to their balance sheets, mostly quietly, because it's Bitcoiners who own businesses who are putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And they do so because they know it's going to give them a competitive advantage long term. It reduces the amount of financing they will ultimately need to take. It reduces the amount of dilution they're going to have to take on board for delivering the future scale-up growth of their businesses. It is a no-brainer, but it's also something to be done in a measured way. And so if we look at MicroStrategy, almost the entire business is fiat financed Bitcoin balance sheet. Just the scale of that aspect of the business makes the operational business look minuscule by comparison.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very explicit trade being done. Right? And we all recognize why that's the case, and they won't be the last. But for most SMEs, they are not run as mini MicroStrategies. They're run for as operating businesses, and Bitcoin is part of the asset mix there. And so, one of the things to bear in mind if you're a business owner watching this is to make sure that business owners are very, very good at managing risk and reward. That's why they're business owners, are not working for the public sector. But if you've got excess cash sitting on your balance sheet, which is not required for cash flow needs, working capital, for future growth, and you're thinking about maintaining the purchasing power of that over any meaningful period, and meaningful being 5 to 10 years into the future, you absolutely should be looking at Bitcoin. To be looking at anything else is just a proxy to delivering what Bitcoin would deliver for you in terms of its quality for the long term. But it has to be out of excess capital. Otherwise, you're introducing risk to the business as opposed to reducing risk from the business.
What do you think are the main factors preventing, specifically where you are, in the UK wider corporate adoption of Bitcoin in treasuries? Is it regulatory uncertainty that you touched on a little bit, volatility, or other factors?
I think it's a combination. I think the biggest one is education. And I hope with the video it's as applicable to business owners as it is to any other member of society. But I think business owners would resonate with it to a greater degree, because businesses feel the brunt, especially in the UK at the moment with the direction of travel politically. Businesses feel under pressure from every direction. Am I held out as the enemy as opposed to the driver of productivity and an improvement in standard of living for everybody? And so, the more people we can educate to understand why Bitcoin is important and help them with that mental framework to position it as something they should be engaging with to help deliver long-term security for their families and their companies, then the better. So education is the main one. There are secondary impacts, and one is obviously the regulatory aspect. The UK is not a friendly jurisdiction for Bitcoin. We have the third largest Bitcoin treasury by accident of any country in the world through Bitcoin that's been handed in the past through criminal trials and such. But I'm not convinced we know where the keys are. It's it's that level of awareness that I think we just lack. Like, apparently we have these things, but I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced the keys have been lost somewhere.
Hmm.
But from a operational perspective, engaging with Bitcoin, engaging with companies that are engaging with Bitcoin, engaging with supporting people engaging with Bitcoin, we're terrible, absolutely terrible from that measure. The FCA has got the whole framework backward and has effectively classes Bitcoin as exactly the same as any meme coin or something like this, which is just destructive for growth in this sector. And this is why we see people leaving the UK left, right, and centre to go to Switzerland or the United Arab Emirates or now increasingly to the US because of the change in policy over there. So, we are UK Bitcoiners, and UK Bitcoiners who own companies are succeeding in spite of the government and not because of the government or in any respect at the moment. And so if we can educate the UK government as to why this is important, then we have a better chance of driving this forward. However, we don't need that. Bitcoin is an optional for everybody. And it's the same for companies as it is for individuals. If the business owner is prepared to make the right decision for them long term, it doesn't matter what the government says. It's just an asset to hold on the balance sheet in the same way that you could buy some commercial property or some livestock or a car and leave it on the driveway. It just makes it harder for them.
Can you touch a little bit on what you mean by the regulatory environment making it harder? I assume there's exchanges or some platform where an individual or a business can acquire Bitcoin, but like what part of the regulatory environment is in what way, I guess, is it hostile or abrasive?
Every way possible, I would say. Even trying to buy Bitcoin in the UK, now you have to fill out survey, you have to answer questionnaires, even to be able to open accounts with exchanges. And then there's cool off periods. There is, even if you get through those, you have to do full KYC, and then when you try and transfer the money from the bank, you have you probably end up having to get on the phone with your bank, try to explain what it is you're doing. The bank is not happy with it. They make it's like Operation Choke Point in the US, but
Mm-hmm.
throughout everything over here. And it's through the miscategorization of Bitcoin as in the same bucket as the likes of meme coins and frauds and all of these things, not for the perfect money that it is. And I would like to think this is accidental, but I suspect it's more politically driven by the regulators. But over time, this will change, and it doesn't prevent people in the UK from engaging with this. It just makes it a lot harder.
Could you give us an example of what a cool off period might be that you mentioned?
Oh, so for example, like you sign up for something and then you've got to wait 24 hours
Got it.
before you then can do anything. And this is, and to put this in context, you don't have this for gambling.
Mm-hmm.
So, I could set up an account with a casino company and start betting immediately and lose all my money.
Right.
But yeah, if I want to buy Bitcoin, I have to jump through all these hoops, and they make it very hard. And it is a natural outcome of being the gatekeepers to a fiat system, in that you want to shut the exits. And we hear these things out of the ECB as well. Christine Lagarde has said before, if there's an exit, people will use it. Okay, well, that's true. They shouldn't need to exit if you weren't destroying everything. And so you are always going to have these challenges with governments and regulators.
What's your reaction to Lagarde recently literally stating something to the effect of, we are never going to buy Bitcoin as a government or as a, central bank?
I think it's one of desperation. And I can't possibly believe that she isn't aware of the giant train heading her way, or heading the way of the euro and fiat currency in general. If she genuinely, well, I would put it this way: it's somewhere on the scale of ignorance on one hand and gaslighting, ignorance at one end and gaslighting at the other end. It's somewhere on that scale.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't believe it's entirely ignorance, but it's probably somewhere in the middle. Because when you live in the fiat system and you're rewarded by the fiat system, and your personal success and reputation is intertwined with the fiat system, it's very unlikely you're going to come out and say, yeah, everyone should be buying Bitcoin, or we're going to buy Bitcoin. And also, I think the timing of that was very telling, because it was just after the Czech National Bank had come out and said they were considering adding some to the balance sheet. And I think coming out and saying that straight afterwards, maybe just a warning shot to make sure nobody in the euro was thinking about talking positively about Bitcoin in any way. But I say these things, Tim, as no longer a member of Europe since the last few years, since the UK left, and I'm just a similar observer like you are.
Yeah, the statement struck me as so odd. It almost hit me as similar to when a child says, I'm not going to take a bath, or I'm not going to bed. And it's like, well, you're in denial because that that's what you're about to do. That's how it hit me just individually. It was like, that's kind of funny in a, perverse way.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Bitcoiners would be very glad that she said that and would be very happy for the ECB never to buy Bitcoin. However, I think we all probably recognize that is not going to be what happens. There is going to reach a tipping point where they are forced to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because the risk of not buying Bitcoin is going to introduce more risk to them long term than the other option.
The Bitcoin for Corporations Conference is coming to Orlando May 6th and 7th. Receive 20% off admission by going to microstrategy.com, selecting Bitcoin for Corporations, and using discount code KOTZ at checkout, and I'll see you there. Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15. How do you think about allocation for an individual, and maybe the same or different for a small business? Is like 1 to 5%, something in that range, something that, because I know over here, right, BlackRock has come out and touted a 1 to 2% allocation. In a traditional portfolio, of course, 5% is kind of the max allocation when you're just in a really diversified kind of regular or traditional portfolio. Do you think a larger allocation than 5% is viable now or in the future? Or just how do you think through all that?
I would say these percentage allocations are coming from a traditional fiat framework, and they're a framework within which you would advocate selling Bitcoin if the price goes up, under the guise of rebalancing, which is fundamentally just the wrong thing to be doing.
Yeah.
And so the whole premise of percentage allocations, I think, it's a way to help get exposure to Bitcoin, get confidence with Bitcoin, start to learn about Bitcoin on their path to then throwing those allocations in the bin. Once they realize that, diversification is often your enemy as opposed to your friend. When you have the only scarce asset in the universe, and game theory and a group of holders of that asset that never want to sell it, never feel like they own enough of it, and will never stop buying it, to think that you should only have 1 or 2% of your portfolio in that asset, and that you should even think about selling if the price went up to rebalance, I mean, it's just totally the wrong thing. But to get to that mindset, it takes a lot of work. You have to go through that door yourself. And so I think, caveat, these are all my opinions, as opposed to any financial advice, obviously. But I think 1 or 2% is a great place to start, to dip your toe in the water. But if you're doing it right, it disappears pretty quickly in terms of the way that you think about managing your portfolio. Now, that said, everyone's circumstances are different, and it very much depends on what your timeframes are here. Because if you're thinking about pension allocations, I wouldn't want anything other than Bitcoin in my pension. Because nothing's going to outcompete this thing over 30 years, 20 years, 15 years. Whereas if I'm thinking about making sure I have a pot of money available. That if anything in the next 5 years comes up, I know I can dip into that. Then Bitcoin's not the right thing, probably, because of the volatility. So for Bitcoin, volatility is a feature, not a bug. But if you're reliant on a series of investments to provide short-term stability, Bitcoin is not the right thing for you. And when it comes to businesses, again, you have to think about the operational nature of the business, the cash needs, the security, the potential black swan events that can hit businesses. And therefore, only really be thinking about Bitcoin treasuries, in my view, with excess capital that is not required for short-term financing needs for the business or operational needs for the business. But one of the beauties of Bitcoin is it's also the most liquid asset in the world. You can buy and sell it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You can't do that with anything else. So it's not like you have an illiquidity issue with this thing either, which you could have with other types of investments from specifically a business perspective. So that's how I would think about it. But absolutely not advice, and everyone makes their own choices in life. But it is wonderful to see big players like BlackRock begin to make these sorts of statements towards the people that listen to them, because we all know, Tim, you know this, I know this. If you start with 1%, you don't end with 1%. So we all know where it's going to end up. We just need everyone to get that first 1%, and then we're done.
Do you think there are certain industries or types of companies that are like better positioned to benefit from adopting Bitcoin in their treasuries? And like, while keeping that as like a broad question, also the observation of, again, not trying to lead the witness or answer the question here, but like some like are tech firms or energy companies or financial institutions like most likely to be the adopters, and kind of like a MicroStrategy, right? They have a BI, business intelligence business. They have AI, and like Bitcoin kind of sits nicely in that narrative. How do you think about the different business sectors and who might adopt first or later, or is that all of that just kind of irrelevant?
I think to a large degree it's irrelevant, because especially if you take I caveat that it's irrelevant if you're just using your business as a financing vehicle to go all in on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Then it doesn't really matter all that much what the business is. If other than ideally very stable, predictable cash flows
Mm-hmm.
that you can then leverage on the most attractive financing terms possible to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. Right? For other companies, I guess you have a natural overlap with energy companies. But energy companies should just be mining Bitcoin anyway as part of their day-to-day business. But so the Bitcoin there is an output rather than an input
Mm-hmm.
into their operational side or competitive advantage. It's hard to see where Bitcoin, just holding Bitcoin on your balance sheet, is an explicit competitive advantage for a particular sector over and above any other sector outside of those things. Because I think it's a competitive advantage for everybody holding Bitcoin and being known as a Bitcoin company, especially over time, because ultimately everyone's going to become a Bitcoiner. And so there are plenty of spots left for companies to become known as Bitcoin companies. in every single sector. The list that you could name right now would be very, very small. And the strategies involved with adopting Bitcoin are massively value accretive with almost no downside risk. So, most of for most, it's like politics. It's like politics. If you're not going to win any votes by bad mouthing Bitcoin, really. You're going to win a lot of votes for talking really positive about Bitcoin. So there's a very asymmetrical return you get from engaging with Bitcoin on the terms you choose to engage. And we've seen that in the election in the US. As a prime example.
Mm-hmm.
The same can be thought of for businesses. Are you going to attract more customers by taking a firm stance against, we definitely don't accept Bitcoin. We are definitely not a Bitcoin company. No. Are you going to lose customers by starting to accept Bitcoin? No. Like, very unlikely. Maybe like one. Maybe somebody who's got the wrong idea about it goes and shops next door, maybe. But are you going to tap into a incredibly motivated customer segment that currently feels drastically underserved, even if they're spending fiat with you? I would love to be able to spend all my fiat that I have to spend with companies I know have Bitcoin DNA, even if I have to spend it fiat. And that becomes a competitive advantage. But it's not sector specific, I would say. I mean, I'm interested, Tim. Do you think, would you have answered the question differently? Do you think there's a particular sector where the adoption of Bitcoin gives you a meaningful competitive advantage, purely in terms of a treasury asset?
I think it's maybe slightly helpful for a business that is in the technology space because Bitcoin is a technology. But other than that, I would give the same answer that you gave, and you get into all of those nuances of you need to have either the business small enough or be able to win over your board and your executives and shareholders to adopt that move if you're of a certain size or voting regimen. But one thing that Ben Workman talks about is we don't think we've yet seen like an actual growth company also adopt Bitcoin. So that could be very interesting, like turbocharged if and when we see that.
We're 100% going to see this. And what is great about Bitcoin, and you already know that Bitcoin's going to enter the financing structure of every part of the risk curve here. And by that I mean you're going to see Bitcoin appear as a standard part of private equity investment deals. You're going to see, logically, you should see Bitcoin appear as, mandated partial treasury assets by venture capital firms. Because it's entirely logical to do those things. And, for example, for your growth business, if a venture capital firm is investing for, a 5 to 10 year horizon, and it wants to maximize the outcome for that business, and it wants to maximize the shareholding it has in that business over time, then you want the business to hold an asset which over that period of time is likely to grow, and is likely to grow significantly, and is therefore going to reduce the need for future dilution of your shareholding, all while giving you meaningful competitive advantage on every aspect until everyone else has adopted Bitcoin. So, imagine if you did have a growth business that was cash generative that had a meaningful Bitcoin treasury, it may not even need any additional funding to scale up. It would just be able to tap its Bitcoin reserves in fiat terms and drive that growth. So it's these sorts of use cases where Bitcoin becomes the long-term rocket fuel for family businesses, growth businesses, zombie companies that have stable cash flows. There's a lot of shareholder value that can get unlocked there by adopting Bitcoin as a treasury asset. It's going to be on every balance sheet eventually. We're just very early.
We've talked about, and you've mentioned the UK regulatory environment versus other countries. Do you see overall, not just the UK, but do you see governments becoming more hostile or more accommodative in the coming years?
I think you'll see both. You'll see both, and this is the beauty of competition.
Mm-hmm.
We have 200 plus countries, all at various stages of waking up to Bitcoin. Some are still fast asleep. Most are still entirely asleep. But some aren't, and some are already driving that competitive advantage by engaging with it. The likes of El Salvador or Bhutan and a number of others. We are all very clear in our own minds that you cannot fight Bitcoin and win. Already, the people who have walked through the door of Bitcoin realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Just the incentives are aligned that you will lose over time. There is much more to gain by engaging with it productively than trying to fight it. But that doesn't mean people won't try and fight it. But what will happen is they will lose very badly. And it'll become very clear to everybody else who hasn't had to make that decision yet that actually embracing it is the correct strategy. But there's going to be some countries that go through painful processes, learning that lesson, because it's a lesson that everybody learns at different points. Is that Bitcoin is going to win. You cannot defeat perfect money, which changes the minds of all the people who use it, and so they never go back. It's impossible to defeat, because eventually everybody thinks that way. And so you're just driving, if you try and fight it, you're just driving economic harm to yourself. You're losing people, you're losing capital to the other side of the island.
Super appreciate your time today. Do you have any closing thoughts? Do you have any resources that you use that you might recommend? And where can people find you on the World Wide Web?
Well, I mean, resources that I recommend is just an endless list of wonderful things that you could read and learn about within Bitcoin. I've tried to, with the creation of the video, my aim is that people watch the video, then want to learn more about Bitcoin, and then hopefully go to the website. And on the website, there's another half a dozen videos, all short videos of different natures, which hopefully will appeal to everybody who lands there from some degree. There's a technical one, there's a banking system one by Lynn Alden. The technical one is, how does the Bitcoin proof of work? How does Bitcoin really work under the bonnet? There's a societal one which covers energy and commerce by Alex Gladstein. There's Sailors, one of Sailor's amazing ones there. And there's one by Jeff Booth as well, thinking more about how it changes you as a person. So I'm hoping there's something for everybody. And so I would direct people to the website, which is satsversusfiat.com. We also have the same handle on X. And my handle on X is Satmojoe. So SATMOJOE. I would love to connect with people, business people, anyone thinking about how to bring Bitcoin into their company for competitive advantage long term. then happy to have conversations, whether you're in the US or the UK or anywhere else. And yeah, please watch the video and share the video with the people you care about.
Wonderful. Joe, thanks so much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. All right, lovely. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.